In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about the 4 types of root cause analysis evidence that you need to be collecting according to TapRooT. I'll explain who TapRooT is, what they do. I'll also explain in detail each of these 4 types of root cause analysis evidence that you need to be collecting. So get your note-taking skills sharpened. We're going to dive into this topic right now.
Welcome to the Safety Pro Podcast, powered by iReportSource, helping you manage safety one episode at a time. With the constant regulatory and workplace culture challenges businesses face, we'll provide you with all the relevant information necessary to achieve a safer, more productive workplace. No management theories, platitudes, or guru speak, just actionable info you can use right away. Now here's your host, the Safety Pro himself, Blaine Hoffman.
Okay, welcome back to the Safety Pro Podcast. Again, we're going to talk about the 4 types of root cause analysis evidence that you need to be collecting. When an incident occurs, it's the investigator's main function to gather all the relevant evidence in order to discover root causes and ultimately prevent reoccurrence, but also contributing factors. The tricky part is that evidence isn't always what it seems. Witness accounts can be spotty or sketchy, inconsistent. They can tell conflicting stories about the same incident, things like that. We've all probably been there. Physical or even environmental conditions can change before we even begin the investigation process. Hey, what about paperwork, right? Work instructions, JSAs, they could be misplaced or even changed or edited in some way or just not present at all. But look, with all these different variables and more, you want to make sure that you collect the right types of evidence during your investigation. I want to share with you some information from TapRooT, which is a systematic process and training for finding the real root causes and precursor incidents for not only major accidents, but minor mishaps and even near misses. Now, according to TapRooT, there are 4 types or categories of evidence to be evaluated. Now, I got to throw this disclaimer out there. You know me, right? I'm not affiliated with TapRooT. I don't get any kind of referrals, credits, or anything for referring TapRoot's training or program. I've used TapRooT training in the past. I have actually talked to many colleagues that have done so as well. We found value in it, so that's why I'm sharing this. The only reason why I'm sharing this with you. I'm sharing yet another tool that you could possibly use to improve workplace safety for you and your organization. So that's the only reason I'm sharing it. So I just want to make sure I get that out there. No affiliation or anything like that. I did reach out to them and I got their permission to share this information. So I want to make sure I give them, full attribution and link to TapRooT in the show notes. If you're listening on Spotify, go to thesafetypropodcast.com for this episode page, and you will see the link there because links don't work in show notes on Spotify. Shame on Spotify. I love Spotify, by the way, but links don't work in the show notes. Maybe they'll fix that soon. But look, TapRooT calls these categories the 3 Ps and an R, and it stands for people evidence, paper evidence, physical evidence, and recording evidence. Let's break down each one and give you some examples. Now, people evidence, the first P. Now, quite often, evidence collection starts with this P, right? People evidence, like witness statements, somebody's notified you that something happened, you're talking to somebody, right? And that evidence can give you some direction, right? It can guide you to collect the other types of evidence that we need to collect that we'll talk about. Some examples of people evidence, obviously interviews, but also not just testimony or statements, right? Think about people evidence in terms of the person that was involved. Fatigue, medical condition or state of mind, actual physical injuries they sustained, that's people evidence. So like the location of the bruise or laceration, the direction of it, how severe it is, condition of the clothing, things like that. So look at people evidence in that context through that lens, not just testimony from interviewing them, but also their physical condition and that type of evidence. So where do you begin with people evidence? Well, first, you got to determine who is involved. Most of the time, it's going to be obvious. But also, this includes people that were indirectly involved. I'll talk about that in a second. So what you're going to do is you're going to start as close to the incident as possible. You're going to hear me repeat that a couple of times. But for the people who were directly involved, were they involved in any previous incidents? Have they been involved in any related performance or conduct issues in the past? Find out if those involved had any work restrictions, like an impairment, physical capability, lapsed accreditation, expired trainings, things like that. Understand how employees worked together, right? And then we can get into some of the indirect employees, folks that were around but not directly involved. What are the dynamics of the team, including supervisors, supervision, team performance? Determine the context, like environmental conditions, distractions, and perspectives, things like that. So you're going to want to get a full picture of the people involved. And then that may drive us to start collecting, paper evidence, the second P. We're talking about regulatory paperwork, activity-specific paperwork, personnel paperwork, policy or procedure paperwork, equipment manuals, work orders, all that kind of stuff, right? So what do you think the biggest mistake is when it comes to collecting paper evidence? If I were to ask you that, what do you think that is? Well, it's probably collecting too much paper that isn't even relevant to the investigation. Now, remember, I mentioned this already. Start as close to the incident as possible. The tool, the machine, the people involved, the process involved, the chemical involved, the area of the workplace involved, and start from there and expand out, okay? So you don't need to collect every piece of paper in your facility, By looking at a timeline of events that led to the incident, you can start to piece together what you're going to need to collect, okay? That's going to tell you. Okay, you need all the paper that supports your timeline of events and supports the facts. Now, if you use TapRooT, their approach, they guide you in the training, they guide you on how to do this. But you can collect things like paperwork diagrams, work instructions. I mentioned all those before. But you're going to want to make sure you collect everything starting as close to the incident, the event as possible, and the people involved as possible. Okay, don't make the mistake of collecting so much paper that, the evidence you need is just buried in there like a needle in a haystack. You're going to get overwhelmed with all of this stuff. And the same with the next P, physical evidence. It's going to be obvious what physical evidence you're going to need to capture, okay? But there are some basics involved. And physical evidence can range from a very large piece of machinery to an individual tool, hand tool. Also, hardware, solid material, raw material, stock related to the incident. You're going to gather physical evidence in one of two ways. You're going to either collect it or you're going to record or document it. We'll talk about both of those. The types of physical evidence to collect, things like broken equipment, parts, residue, debris like broken glass, shattered material, fluid samples, oil samples, chemical samples. You got paint samples. You're going to want to collect any kind of raw material that was involved. And then you go to the CSI stuff, right? Hair, blood stains, tissue, other DNA, depending upon the nature of the, incident, you may be looking at collecting that type of evidence as well. Types of physical evidence that you're going to want to record or document because you're not likely to be able to physically collect it. Things like burn marks, flame patterns. You can't collect that. So you're going to document that, right? You're going to record it and document it that way. Tracks, vehicle tracks, tire tracks, things like that. There is a way to physically collect tire tracks. If you take a mold, if there's an impression, but I will say that if it starts to rain, snow, other vehicles in the area that have to get through, you may lose the ability to physically collect that. So you're going to want to document and record it as soon as possible. Things like handprints, footprints, fingerprints, tools, certain equipment's too large to collect. So you're going to want to document and record the state of that equipment, the doors, panels, just every aspect that's relevant to the incident. Any products that are in use or machines or processes that are in use and continue to be in use is also a good candidate for recording or documenting that physical evidence. Also, any equipment status, what state the equipment is in, you're not going to be able to collect that. You're going to have to record or document it. Any trouble lights, e-stops that were engaged or not engaged, you're going to want to record that, okay? Lights, noise, temperature, especially as those things change. I'll talk about perishable stuff here in a minute, but any obstructions, surface hazards, housekeeping, any clarity of any signs or labels or lack thereof, you're going to want to record. I mean, that's physical evidence, right? Some other things you may also want to collect, which includes information too, not just physical evidence, but that falls under this category, is any failure history, modifications or changes to a process or equipment that were made in the past, any documents related to that, operator interface, maintenance records, any kind of contractors that were, commissioned to install, modify, or repair this stuff. Make sure that you collect those and preserve those as well. Now, the R part of this process, recording evidence, you're going to want to make sure that your photography and video are captured as soon as possible after the incident. So look, I'm going to give you a heads up on this. Use some tact here, okay? And I'm going to tell you a quick story about this. Actually happened to me. I was there when this happened. It floored me, absolutely floored me. I couldn't believe that this occurred. Look, you're going to want to record and photograph things as close to the incident as possible, but the first priority always is to care for injured workers. EMTs, paramedics, even first aid providers, in-house first aid providers, they're going to be involved in moving equipment and moving things. They're going to disturb the scene to get to the injured worker, right? You're just going to have to rely on piecing this stuff together through testimony, interviews from those first on the scene to be able to piece all that together. You're not going to be able to photograph a lot of this stuff. And the story I'm going to tell you, it alarmed me. But I was on a project, a very, very large project. I was managing safety on this project and many years ago. And this incident occurred right in front of us. We were in a section of the building, about 1 million plus square foot of building under roof. And it was one, I think he was a refrigeration contractor is who he was. He was on the roof and fell through an opening and fell 42 feet to the ground, to gravel. We hadn't paved in that area yet. His fall was broken up by hitting a scissor lift that was, not in use directly underneath him. He was, in an aerial lift and got out onto the roof and stepped backwards into an opening that wasn't plugged up, secured, and fell and hit the scissor lift, and it kind of broke up his momentum, but he ended up falling and hitting the ground, and we run over, and this individual's trying to get up. So, my EMT background or my medical background, I'm like, okay, first thing you do, don't move them. Don't try to move. So I'm telling the individual to stay down, don't move. We're going to get help. He had some visible injuries, clearly. And so the paramedics, we initiate the 911 process. The paramedics are right down the road. I mean, you could see, if you looked across the 600 acres or whatever to the main road there, you could see the firehouse. So the EMTs got there right away. As a matter of fact, they got to the scene of the for where the victim was before the GC, the general contract rep, got out there. So I don't know why he was delayed, but he got his camera and he gets on his gator and hauls all the way out there. So I've got a compress on the victim's head, and the paramedics are trying to work on this guy. And there were two, one on each side, and they're doing the patient assessment, and they're trying to get the extent of his injuries. And they go to cut off his harness and his Carhartts. It was really cold that morning. And I'm not kidding. This is no lie, and I'm not even exaggerating. This is exactly how it happened. The GC, with the camera in his hand, puts his hand on the paramedic's shoulder and pulls her back a little and says, wait, don't cut that off yet. I have to get photos to prove that he had his harness on and didn't tie off. And I would go to stand up, and she didn't even miss a beat. She turns around and says, if you put your hands on me one more time and stop me from caring for my patient, I will have you arrested. And I was like, oh, snap. So I knelt back down and continued my work. She had it under control. But look, bottom line, don't be that guy. Okay, there's a time and place to take evidence and to collect evidence and to take photos. Okay, so keep that in mind. Having said that, when you do collect this info, you can get it from different sources. You could take the video yourself and the photos yourself, but also you could probably get any site security cameras, control room cameras, traffic cams if it's an auto accident. You're going to be able to collect that kind of evidence as well. So don't forget those things. Any photos or recordings that somebody else may have been taking, audio recordings, noise levels, if you have voicemail recordings or videos, like if somebody left a voicemail that something happened, the timestamp on that could be critical. What they said in that voicemail could be critical. Always check with legal counsel. Each state has different laws about using audio recordings as evidence or especially in court cases. But look, just check with legal counsel on some of that stuff. And when it comes to taking photos, make sure you start wide. It's the opposite of what I told you before. Before, it's normally you would start as close to the incident as possible, and then through the natural course of discovery, you will follow a logical path to collecting and expand from there. With photos, it's the opposite. Start with a wide shot, even an aerial shot. Go to Google Maps and get an aerial shot if it's a recent shot and a current depiction of the site, the building, the structure, or a map of the facility and mark where the incident occurred, and then start collecting photos of specific, narrowing in on specific tight shots of the scene. So there's a way to do that. And again, TapRooT training, there's other training out there as well. So look, you'll be able to get some training on how to properly document a scene, okay? You can also look at computer data. So magnetic card swipes, people badging into rooms or clocking in when they clocked in, piece together the timeline. That's the most important piece right there is the timeline. Also data logs from machines, run times, cycle times, what state the machine was in when something occurred. That can also help support the timeline. Also sketches of an incident scene. This is a good one. Like traffic accidents is the most common one where you sketch out the intersection and stuff. And look, that's why I like things like iReportSource. They have a really cool tool that allows you to create a diagram of any intersection or road available and add vehicles and stop signs and lights and to tag them and label them and to be able to create that little sketch and save it. And it's nice and clean, so you don't have to rely on your artistic skills or lack thereof in some cases. So, look, bottom line, as you're recording the scene, ask, am I recording the scene as it was in its original state, or what if something has changed? And then start going down the path of asking and interviewing and documenting what has changed and why, and as best as you can, right? Be sure to capture that information. Identify any fragile or perishable evidence. I alluded to perishable evidence before. Make sure you photograph that and collect that. So a good example of perishable are, I mentioned tracks, but any environmental conditions like ice, snow, rain, as things dry or, as the day progresses, temperature changes, or the opposite, it starts to snow or accumulate ice and snow. Make sure that you capture all that stuff as soon as possible, okay? Make any note of transient evidence as well that can't be captured by camera or video maybe, like steam, smoke, vapors, smells, temperature, things like that, all right? Look, the best way to collect unbiased evidence is to gather evidence from each of these four categories: people, physical, paper, and recordings. Each piece of evidence collected will help lead you to the root causes of the incident so that you can properly analyze them for effective corrective and preventative action. Look, nothing is more frustrating. We've been there. Nothing is more frustrating than going through this process only to discover you worked on the wrong problem and it didn't actually prevent recurrence because stuff happens again. And that leads me to things like iReportSource with the managed workflow. No matter if it's a near miss, a minor mishap, first aid, or recordable, you get the same managed workflow that you follow. You got, witness statements, photo evidence. You got the incident basics, of course. You've got the supervisor report. You've got the root cause. You've got the corrective action. You got the follow-up, and then the closure checklist. You have to go through it. And I was talking to a colleague, Kyle, and he'll remember this. I won't mention his last name, but he'll remember this conversation. It was a great conversation because we were both kind of collaborating and sharing our experiences with this. and our frustration when we get this pushback of, you mean I got to fill all this paperwork out, or, I've got to go through this work. Again, digital workflow makes it super simple. So you eliminate paper, but I got to do this every time I need a Band-Aid for a minor laceration. And my approach has always been the same over the years and hasn't failed me yet. And that is, my reply to them is, okay, you don't want to find out what's causing this laceration so we can fix the process and improve it? Fine. Come and find me when you lose part of your finger. Then maybe we'll determine whether or not it's severe enough that we could fix the problem. Call me when you need surgery to reconnect tendons, or call me when you lose partial use of your hand and need 16 stitches in surgery. Then maybe we'll figure out if we want to fix it. And they usually look at me and go, and they get it. Look, I understand, but you have to even do this for like minor incidents. Make sure that you don't skip steps simply because you think it's a minor incident. You're going to miss an opportunity to improve and prevent a serious one down the road. So let me know what you think. Share your comments with me. Let's connect on LinkedIn. That's, where I like to meet people. So find me on LinkedIn. Leave your comments. You can reach out via email. The link is on the website, thesafetypropodcast.com. And let me know what you think. What techniques and tips and tricks do you use for preserving evidence and collecting evidence in support of root cause analysis? And until the next Safety Pro Podcast episode, as always, be safe.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Safety Pro Podcast, powered by iReportSource, the all-in-one digital safety solution. For info on how you can request a free demo on all the capabilities of iReportSource to streamline your business's safety management system, head over to thesafetypropodcast.com. We look forward to helping you manage safety on the next episode of the Safety Pro Podcast.